A lot of people think that the first thing Australians notice in America is the big obvious stuff. You know, the giant pickup trucks, flags everywhere, massive portion sizes. But honestly, if you live here, the first things you notice are usually much smaller. And it's the way that people interact. The social rhythm feels different almost immediately. And after living here for years now, I honestly think that Australians and Americans are actually pretty similar underneath it all. It's more so the delivery system that changes.
You better take cover.
One of the first things that hit me when I moved to the States was how quickly conversations can start here. Now, you walk into a store and someone's immediately, "How are y'all doing today?" And mate, I barely had crossed the doorway. Now, back home, we're friendly too, but there's usually a bit more of a slow build before they fully commit to an interaction. Americans just seem much more comfortable just launching straight into it. Now, I was in a grocery store yesterday and the cashier immediately started asking me about my accent, where I was from, what brought me to Tennessee. And look, I'm used to that happening almost every time I step outside nowadays, but I still catch myself thinking, we're getting very personal for a bloke just trying to buy some bananas. But after a while, you do realise that that's just normal here. There's more outward interaction built into everyday life. People react more openly as well. You'll be trying to reverse a trailer or carrying something awkward. Suddenly, nearby strangers are emotionally invested in your success. You know, they're shouting out, "You've got this." And weirdly, it actually grows on you. I caught myself doing it recently in a car park. And it was some guy who was trying to back into a tight spot. And without even thinking about it, I went, "You're good, mate. Yep, just keep going." And halfway through, I realised I think I've actually joined in. I also noticed this really quickly at my daughter's dance competitions here. American competitions are huge productions, big energy. A kid finishes a routine and the reaction is immediate. There's cheering and clapping and people yelling support from the crowd. Teachers are out the back trying to hype the kids up before they go on stage, and everything feels just that little bit more turned up. So one of Georgia's early competitions here, after she finished, people around us were reacting like she just headlined Madison Square Garden. But to be truthful, after a few comps, you start getting swept up into all of it as well. And you suddenly find yourself standing there yelling with everyone else, like, "Let's go, Georgia," which is not something younger Australian me probably ever saw coming. And it's actually one of the things I've noticed most about America generally. People here often seem much more comfortable expressing encouragement outwardly in the moment. And it's not about being more supportive. It's just about being more expressive about it. That's another thing I noticed here too. Americans narrate what they're doing out loud all the time. Just going to sneak past you. I'll be right with you. Let me grab that for you. Now, at first, it does kind of feel a little strange. It's not in a bad way. It's just different to how we do things back home. I think Australians are often much more comfortable with silence. And an Aussie can stand next to you for 10 minutes without saying a word, and somehow it still feels completely friendly. That's normal to us. Americans tend to keep interactions moving a bit. There's almost a layer of verbal cushioning happening all the time. I spoke about that a bit more on the podcast recently as well, that strange difference between American openness and Australian familiarity. Because Aussies tend to show warmth once the walls come down a little, whereas Americans are often comfortable starting warm immediately. And once you notice that, a lot of the little differences suddenly all start to make sense. I noticed it really heavily when I first started working in banking here as well. So Australia, a customer might walk in, handle what they need to handle, maybe have a quick chat, then head off. In the States, people often wanted the interaction itself to feel good. There'd be conversation, stories, questions, little jokes. I even had clients pray for me in the office. Now, sometimes someone would come in to do one tiny thing and suddenly 20 minutes had disappeared and I knew about their cousin's surgery and the issues they were having with their boat. And the weird thing is, eventually I stopped finding that unusual because it just became a part of normal life. Another thing Australians notice pretty quickly is how comfortable Americans are with sincerity. Americans will openly say things like, "That's awesome," or "I'm proud of you. You got this." Now, Australians encourage people too, but we usually disguise it slightly so nobody feels uncomfortable. And Aussie saying, "Good on you, mate," is basically a full emotional support package. It's different wording with the same intention. And you notice this, especially when Americans start asking personal questions. Americans are way more comfortable getting into real life topics much earlier. What do you do? How long have you been here? You got kids? Meanwhile, Aussies are still trying to work out whether the interaction is permanent or not. When we first moved here, I had people asking whether we owned our house within about 3 minutes of meeting us. Now, my Australian brain immediately went, "Mate, we haven't even reached the weather chat level yet." But again, it's not rude, and that's the important thing to point out. In America, questions are often part of friendliness, part of engagement, part of showing an interest. And Australians can sometimes show friendliness by giving people a bit more space instead. And you notice that physically too. People stand differently here, they queue differently, use public spaces differently. Americans are generally more comfortable interacting in shared spaces, whereas Aussies will tend to quietly spread out and avoid becoming part of each other's day if you can avoid it, especially in supermarkets. So an Aussie supermarket experience is basically eyes down, small nod, everyone pretend that this isn't happening. America feels a bit more socially open in those little moments. Even neighbours feel different sometimes. When we first moved into our neighbourhood here, people introduced themselves really quickly. There were conversations in driveways, people waving, random chats while you're getting the mail. And to be fair, I think some of that is probably amplified by living where I am in the South, because here there is a very outwardly friendly culture. But even then, it still felt noticeably different to me as an Aussie. In Australia, neighbours can absolutely become close friends, but there's often a slightly longer leave each other alone respectively phase first. Americans seem more comfortable breaking that barrier earlier. And we lived in our house in Australia for over 10 years and honestly barely interacted with our neighbours. But it was until a random car lost control, took out a tree in our front yard and ended up in their living room. That was probably our biggest social breakthrough, thanks to a drunk driver. And then there's convenience. America genuinely treats convenience as a priority. Everything feels designed to remove friction. Drive-throughs, pick-up systems, free refills, custom orders. You can modify a meal in America to the point where the kitchen staff probably need counselling afterwards. And Americans don't seem remotely embarrassed about it. Australians are often more, "Don't worry about it, mate. I'll just eat around it. Don't make a fuss." And this one actually causes a bit of marriage friction in my house because my wife will order coffees with a whole list of customisations that I'm personally far too embarrassed to actually ask for. Triple shot latte, coconut milk, half sweetener, extra hot. Probably stirred with a spoon carved from Brazilian timber that's been blessed by monks. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, what are you doing? Can you just get a coffee? But honestly, that idea of individual preference being built into everything is one of the biggest differences that you will feel here. Is America is very customized. It's your version, your setup, your order, your choice. I guess after a while, you slowly start adapting to that yourself. I did write a bit more about the side of American life on the website recently too, because It's hard to fully explain properly in one video, especially that strange moment where you realize that living overseas solely changes the way that you read people. Because that's the weird part. After a while, you stop consciously noticing these differences. You adapt. That is until you go back to Australia and suddenly you realize that you've changed a little bit yourself too. You start talking to strangers faster, maybe explaining yourself more, encouraging people out loud. And then halfway through a conversation back home, you suddenly catch yourself saying, yeah, just going to sneak past you there. And you think, yeah, crap, there it is. And the people supporting the channel through Buy Me a Coffee lately as well, genuinely appreciate it. Especially while I continue my slow transformation into an Australian that explains his movements in supermarkets. Catch you next time. Hooroo, mateys.
You better take cover.